while ago, I was doing a live stream to try and fix a problem I'd been having. I really wanted to challenge my high-level players using just the tools and features available in the rule set of 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. And as it turns out, we discovered on that live stream that there is, in fact, a way to create a virtually inescapable prison using just those tools. No GM fiat or NPC magic. So here's a tutorial on how to do exactly that. And all you really need is a single wizard with 9th level spells, really. And I'm not doing this to give players the tools with which to destroy Game Master's games. That's not my intention here. I want to explore just how much we can push the implications of high-level magic into a D&D world, and what sort of solutions the people of that world, who are familiar with that magic, might come up with. Oh, and by the way, if you would like to see the full VODs of any of my past and future streams, or gain access to my videos as soon as I'm finished editing them, then I can only recommend signing up to my YouTube memberships program. It also gets you exclusive access to message me and ask me all sorts of questions and things if you have that inclination as well. And there's another stream coming soon, so watch this space. This method starts, like any good incarceration, with imprisonment. Specifically the 9th level spell imprisonment, which, despite being a fairly unpopular choice for 9th level spells, has been nerfed to some extent in the new edition anyway. Imprisonment only affects creatures, so if you've got an object you'd like to store instead, use it like a vault essentially, you're going to need to either put that object inside a creature or true polymorph the object into a creature. Another use for true polymorph in the setup phase is if your prisoner is likely to be capable of casting a 9th level dispel magic, in which case you need to polymorph them into something that can't do that, say a frog. True polymorph, by the way, and let that duration tick over. We will be coming back to true polymorph later. What imprisonment does is kind of self-explanatory. It magically traps a creature, but it also makes them immune to the effects of aging, not need to breathe, eat, or drink, and makes them unfindable and unseeable by any divination magic. Then, the caster chooses an additional thematic binding method. The best one for our purposes here, I'll save you the trouble, is Hedged prison, which traps the creature in a demiplane, themed however you'd like, really, which is inaccessible by planar travel or teleportation. The spell ends either when Dispel Magic is used at 9th level on the prison itself, which is why you're polymorphing the person before you put them in, or when Dispel Magic is used on the components used to cast Imprisonment. This component, by the way, is a statuette of the creature that you are imprisoning that's worth more than 5,000 gold pieces. There is also one more way to end imprisonment, which is part of this new nerf to the spell, or clarification we could say. When a specified condition stated at the start of the spell's casting is met, and that condition has to be likely to happen within the next decade of the spell's being cast. This high likelihood thing might be a little abusable, though. Let's say a condition is made that a 10-year-old child must kick a particular stone down a specific road. That is the condition that ends the imprisonment of whatever ancient evil you're sealing away. However, if after casting the spell you gathered up this specific rock and threw it into a volcano, or flooded the entire valley in which this village section is, or made all 10-year-olds in the entire region legally required to go and serve as apprentices at some local temple in a major city, say, just for the entirety of their 10th year of age, then you could theoretically reduce the likelihood of something that was pretty highly likely to happen in some 10 years to 0. This might feel cheesy or cheap, but I would argue that anyone willing to go through that level of pettiness just to ensure that an individual is locked away, a single individual is locked away forever, might deserve a win every now and then. Now, assuming that's an acceptable solution to the whole there has to be a condition thing, all we need to worry about, really, is dispel magic, which is why we picked the hedged prison. All other imprisonment effects leave a tangible, findable prison somewhere out there in the world, either buried in the earth, rooting an individual to the ground with chains, trapping them inside a gemstone, or sending them to eternal sleep. Someone will find it eventually. For Hedged Prison specifically, your target is trapped inside a demiplane that is warded against teleportation and planar travel. A demiplane is a plane that exists as its own tiny little plane of existence, and the only way really to access one is planar travel. You can't even access the demiplane created by imprisonment using the demiplane spell, because that does generally allow the connection of demiplane to demiplane. But I will give you the exact wording. If you know the nature and contents of a demiplane created by a casting of demiplane, this spell, by another creature, you can connect to that demiplane instead. The Hedged Prison's demiplane is created by the imprisonment spell, not by the demiplane spell, and therefore is inaccessible even using this backdoor technique. In fact, I'd go as far to say as it's inaccessible by any player facing magic. This means, with Hedged Prison alone, we only have a single point of failure. The 5,000 gold piece worth statuette of your victim, which I would argue, in the 2024 version specifically, is a mundane object. Spell components generally are. At least that's my interpretation. It is hard to say with any certainty, but I will stress that the 2014 version of the imprisonment spell is very clear that the spell component is a special component. This version doesn't specify that there's anything special about this spell component, and spell components, again, are not magical as a rule. But you could also argue that because this spell component needs a 9th level dispel magic to be cast upon it to break the spell, there might be some residual magic in the statuette. Now, you might argue that all this is immaterial. If there is a single point of failure for your imprisonment spell, then surely just all you need to do is destroy that single point of failure entirely. Of course, there's also the release condition that must be highly likely to happen at some point within the next 10 years, but I think we can all agree there are ways to cheese that. You could also, though, argue that completely destroying a key component of the spell's magic might end the spell. It's very unclear. Honestly, I think it could be ruled anyway. For our purposes then, if we ignore this decision point, there's two ways to proceed. One way, the component is a mundane item, and just so happens to be a linchpin for some active spell, in which case it is vulnerable to true polymorph, which is our next step. Or two, this little statuette is a magical item, and so we need to make it be a mundane item for true polymorph to take effect, which could theoretically be achieved through Nistel's magic aura, which would allow us to trick certain types of magic into thinking that it is a mundane item. It's not clear whether Nistel's magic aura tricks the check for true polymorph or not. That's again an ambiguity. Now the other way to make this magical item non-magical so that we can target it with true polymorph involves a 20th level cleric and an anti-magic field. I will explain. Basically, to clarify, our next step involves turning this object into a creature, a specific creature. But true polymorph only works when cast on a mundane object. The only way I can find in D&D's rules explicitly of making a magic item into a mundane one comes from anti-magic field, which explicitly stated in the 2014 version, at least, that magic items become mundane when inside it. The 2024 version, though, in fairness, as we are using exclusively 2024 rules as far as we can here, instead says magical properties of magic items don't work inside the aura, which I would say feels similar enough. The 20th level cleric is needed because anti-magic field does have a single exception to blocking all magic, or at least suppressing all magic. Specifically, that would be spells cast by artifacts and or deities. The cleric's 10th level divine intervention allows them to call on your deity or pantheon to intervene on your behalf. Essentially, this functions as a spell of 5th level or lower is cast because the gods make it happen. At 20th level, that range of spells extends to include wish. If that wish is made to cast true polymorph, well then, based upon at least the flavour text, which is a loose basis to hang things on, it should be cast by the deity's intervention, therefore not being suppressed by the anti-magic field and allowing the object to transform. Otherwise you'd need an artifact to do the same thing. But this may still not satisfy. I do have a last-ditch option here if you're not happy with the interpretation that I'm using here of anti-magic field's interaction with divine or artifact magic. My last resort here is to use an officially published magic item that was published as a tie-in to the Dungeons and Dragons movie Honor Among Thieves, the Helm of Disjunction. This generates an anti-magic pulse, which suppresses the magical properties of magic items for a minute when used. And crucially, this is a momentary pulse, therefore it doesn't stop spellcasting, which means that within the minute that this magical item is suppressed in its magic, true polymorph can easily be used in that time on a mundane object, which turns our statuette, finally, after a whole bunch of fiddling, into a CR4 construct that is of medium size. This was the goal all along. A helmed horror. I must here credit Silic for their suggestion towards the tail end of this live stream I was talking about in the chat, for putting me on to this specific creature. See, what we really need is for our statuette to be immune to dispel magic. That means that it can't be dispelled, the prison cannot ever be broken, theoretically. Dispel magic is the only way, other than that stipulation that had to be reasonable at the point of spellcasting but might not be reasonable afterwards because of the actions of the spellcaster, it's the only way that the hedged prison can ever end. And it just so happens that a helmed horror, when created, gains immunities to 3 spells chosen by its creator. For these we're going to choose Anti-Magic Field, Dispel Magic, and Wish for good measure. Then we cast Sequester on our helmed horror, which makes him not only invisible but also undetectable by any magic or divination. Also stops him requiring any sustenance, which generally they don't anyway because they're constructs, and places him in a state of suspended animation. This sequestering ends, by the way, if he takes any damage at all. Okay, so now we just need to find somewhere safe to store our invisible medium-sized construct for all eternity. Not quite. The thing is, our helmed horror is still vulnerable. Vulnerable specifically to being polymorphed into a different creature or object. A creature or object which is then not immune to dispel magic. And our whole elaborate prison plan falls apart right there. Because if you true polymorph our helmed horror into a frog, and then cast a 9th level dispel magic, all the spells we've used so far are 9th level or below. They are immediately counteracted, one by one, all as part of the same action of dispel magic, which would actually open up the prison immediately. This is a glaring flaw. Unless you were to choose to polymorph our helmed horror into a slightly different helmed horror. This time we're going to make him immune to dispel magic, polymorph, and true polymorph. But wait, you say, surely you know, Tom, that spell effects don't stack. Are you sure about that? Sure they don't. They don't stack simultaneously. As best I can find, the spell effect combination rules relevant to this effect are as follows. The effects of the same spell cast multiple times don't combine. Instead, the most potent effect, such as the highest bonus from these castings, applies when their duration overlaps. The most recent effect applies if the castings are equally potent and their durations overlap. In this case, both true polymorphs are equally potent 9th level spells. Their durations overlap until dispelled if concentrated on for an hour with the initial casting. And so the second casting of true polymorph takes precedence over the first, at least until that second casting's duration ends. So our helmed horror is immune to polymorph and true polymorph and dispel magic until that effect ends. And when that effect ends, he's turned into the first version of helmed horror, which is immune to anti-magic field, wish, and dispel magic again. In this case, the only way to end the second version of true polymorph, then, that I can think of, is to suppress its effect with an anti-magic field, which the second version is not immune to, which causes the second true polymorph to cease functioning. And because of those spell stacking rules, because this spell effect is no longer affecting this creature, it reverts to the first casting of true polymorph, who is completely immune to anti-magic field, which stops the anti-magic field shenanigans from tearing apart all of our hard work. But our creature's now vulnerable to being polymorphed. It's not immune to polymorph anymore. The thing is, any caster of polymorph would need to cast that polymorph through an anti-magic field. It does seem unlikely that this could be achieved, especially seeing as the helmed horror specifically is sequestered and therefore invisible, which both polymorph and true polymorph require line of sight, so you need to be able to see invisibility as well. As such, to break into this prison, you're going to need to employ some shenanigans. Specifically, the key of which is to reverse engineer the process that I just described of creating the prison. Ideally, you're going to use an anti-magic field, followed by that 20th level cleric divine intervention trick that we talked about earlier, to polymorph the helmed horror into a different CR4 creature. Has to be CR4 because if you pick a lower CR, then technically that spell is less potent than the others, and the first condition applies, meaning that our true polymorph beats yours. At which point, then and only then, you can use a 9th level dispel magic. It takes a whole party and the direct intervention of a god, but you can do it. Right? Except in fact this doesn't work at all. Because remember, our first helmed horror is immune to wish. Even the gods are no help. The only way I can think of to bypass this prison is either to use an artifact to cast true polymorph, which I'm not sure that there are any, or use the movie tie-in magic item from Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. The Helm of Disjunction, ironically, is, I think, the only official way of getting out of this jam. It states that when used, any ongoing spell ends if the creature, object, or area affected by it is even partly in the pulses area. This would instantaneously turn our helmed horror into a statuette. Even from the second straight down to the first, it dispels every single spell on this statuette. But that's the only way. Heck, even beating this helmed horror up doesn't really work, as reducing it to 0, or even killing it, doesn't end true polymorph, which lasts specifically until dispelled. And also, in case you're wondering why I'm saying that the spell immunities still carry over even when the creature's dead, well, death or destruction don't stop creatures from having traits, as evidenced by the stat blocks of the Flame Skull, the Lich, and the Troll, all of which have some way of coming back after either being reduced to 0 hit points or simply completely destroyed. And all of this is achievable for the low, low price of 10,000 gold pieces, 3 9th level spell slots, and a 7th level. Oh, and I did forget to mention, this all assumes you can even find the helmed horror to begin with. An unmoving, undetectable by magic, invisible construct in suspended animation somewhere across the planes of existence. What I've outlined today for you is just the basic setup. Nested demiplanes, hundreds of decoy helmed horrors all sequestered across realities. Perhaps you could even store your helmed horror inside an iron flask if you're feeling really mean, or stick it in a room surrounded on all sides by mirrors of life trapping, because it's a construct it's immune to those. If you want to see some of those ideas played with, fleshed out and teased out a little bit more, do check out the Perfect Prisons live stream that I did a while ago. It's a VOD, so it is only available to YouTube members. But if you do want to catch my next live stream, keep yourself in the loop, and I'll be announcing that pretty soon. Anyone can join any of my live streams at any point and chat and all that lovely stuff. But afterwards, they go over to the YouTube members for exclusive VOD access after the fact. I really hope today that I've helped my fellow high-level GMs design something pretty diabolical that can't just be brute forced by a player ability, that forces your players to come up with a plan, think outside the box, make deals with massively powerful entities to try and break through some of these warded protections, and giving you a platform on which to build something creative and probably morally bankrupt. I also hope that I've not ruined too many game nights with this, and that maybe even you've learned something about how specific niche rules and spells interact in this 2024 edition of Dungeons and Dragons. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.